This is the kind of thing most folks imagine themselves doing when they buy a Land Rover Defender. But here's the reality. Unless you find yourself regularly filming on the set of a David Attenborough documentary, you're more likely to find yourself wading through the parking lot of Whole Foods to buy some overpriced sushi. Oh my gosh, come on, just please back up. And look, this isn't a bad thing. It's not a slight against Land Rover or Land Rover buyers, but the reality is that here in the USA, most folks aren't driving over the kind of terrain that we see in the advertisements. Now I have to eat this, but Brendan got tuna, and I hate tuna. A Land Rover rep once told me it takes the typical Land Rover 7 years or 70,000 miles before it ever sees dirt. And with that in mind, you have to put yourself in the perspective of the engineer designing the new Defender. If you know that the first couple owners are probably never ever going to take it off-road, you really got to ride that balance between off-road capability and on-road comfort. See, here's the challenge. The engineering principles that you need when developing a vehicle that performs well out in the dirt are oftentimes polar opposite to what you need to make a vehicle to perform comfortably and safely on the road. In an off-road vehicle, you need quite a bit of ground clearance to traverse over obstacles, rocks, boulders, that kind of thing. And obviously, it's easy to develop a vehicle with a lot of ground clearance. But if you want the vehicle to not be too topsy-turvy in the turns, if you want the vehicle to get good fuel efficiency, well then you want it to be pretty low and close to the ground. Then we come to suspension design. Now in an off-road suspension design, you want to maximize traction with the ground at any given time, regardless of the size of the obstacle you're driving over. And often that will involve a solid axle design, which is a very basic beam setup. However, for maximum on-road performance, you want an independent suspension design so that the bumps felt in one wheel aren't transmitted to the other. In an off-road vehicle, you typically want some kind of differential lock that allows all four wheels to spin at the same speed regardless of the terrain. And lastly, we come to the dilemma of weight. You see, a lot of the stuff you want off-road, like skid plates and a low-range transfer case, are pretty heavy, which is worse for everything on the road, for fuel economy, for performance, for handling, where you typically want to maximize lightness as much as possible. Land Rover tackles the issue of ground clearance by simply changing the ride height depending on whether or not you're on the road or off-road. There's also an access height to make getting in and out a little bit easier, and even an extend mode if you're high-centered. Now, the old school Defender was a very basic design. It was solid axle, which means you got that beam axle front and back, and it was also body on frame, so you had a ladder chassis with the body bolted on top. Well, this new Defender is a fully independent suspension setup. Every corner has its own suspension members, and it's also a unibody design. Now, let's talk about that unibody versus body on frame. Land Rover says that by going to a unibody design, they've actually strengthened the rigidity of the vehicle by 3 times. Land Rover has also done a lot of work with the independent suspension on this vehicle. So it's an air suspension setup, but it is a pretty sophisticated design. You see, typically when you go into an off-road height on an independent suspension vehicle, what happens is you end up topping out the suspension, gets really firm, really uncomfortable, and there's not a lot of flex or ability for the suspension to work with the ground underneath. However, Land Rover has really done a nice job with this independent suspension on this Defender. Even in the off-road height right now, on this trenches course, it's just doing such a good job of keeping the wheels in contact with the surface. It kind of replicates what you'd expect out of a solid axle vehicle. And when you combine that with the Land Rover terrain response, it's really impressive. Really, really impressive. The vast majority of cars and SUVs built have open differential. This vehicle also has a locking rear differential, and we're going to show how that works. So I'm on a diagonal slip test, so the right front and the left rear are stuck in these rollers. I'm just in the standard rock crawl program right now, and the vehicle can lock and unlock both the center and the rear diff when it sees fit. So I'm going to let off the brake, and you can see that that rear diff was locked up, ready to go, and we saw no spinning whatsoever. Now for the 3-wheel slip test, only the right rear is on the ground. The other 3 are stuck in the rollers. Let's go into neutral, into drive, and let's see if that rear diff is really locked up like it's supposed to be. I mean, it's like, come on. Makes it boring. All right, now we only have one front wheel on the ground. So that right front is gonna have to spin if we're gonna get unstuck here. Into neutral, let the vehicle settle. Into drive, still in the rock crawl mode. Gentle throttle application. Wheels start to spin. Traction control engages. Guys, the Land Rover 4-wheel drive system with terrain response, it's amazing. It truly is probably the best 4-wheel drive system on the market, almost bar none. Now the Land Rover Defender does have a proper 2-range transfer case, but it is an option. The Land Rover Defender can also be spec'd with bash plates, but once again, it is an option. What is nice though is that you can spec these things. So up front here we've got an aluminum bash plate which protects the radiator, the engine with the small cutout for the differential, the transmission, and the transfer case. Now as we make our way further back, we do find a lot of this felty material, which is not quite as durable as I'd like, especially when you're protecting stuff like the fuel tank back here. And then out back, of course, look at the size of those lower control arms. A truly beefy setup. There's your rear differential. Once again, a little bit exposed, but it is there with that proper locking unit. And is it as maybe purpose-built underneath here as like a Bronco Badland, the Wrangler Rubicon with rock rails and fuel tank skids? It is not. But is it more purpose-built than like a BMW X5 or like a Mercedes GLE? Absolutely, and this is going to take you much farther than both of those vehicles. Look, as much as I'd like a hairy-chested man's Defender with solid axles, body on frame, and no shoulder room, I have to say, I think Land Rover made absolutely the right call by bringing over this new version with independent suspension and a lot more comfort, because in the few years this vehicle has been on sale, they have sold over 57,300 Defenders here in the US. And if you compare that to the North American spec of the original Defender they brought over, well, they sold just 3,221 of those over a similar time span. So, I mean, clearly what they did is working. And in a world where just about every new crossover is a unibody 4-door with a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine, the Defender can be had in 3- and 5-door configurations, in short, medium, and long versions with a choice of 3 engines ranging from a 4-cylinder turbo to a monster 5-liter supercharged V8 with 525 horsepower. That's nuts! It's not all sunshine and roses with the Land Rover Defender. And we got to talk about the price. $82,750 as equipped. That is a lot of money, especially for a vehicle that is not nearly fully loaded. This is still a Defender S, albeit with the 3-liter inline 6, but it's not even an SE, so $82,000, almost $83,000. It's a lot of money. And then we come to the wheels. Now this is called Style 9013, and it is a fantastic look. It looks like a purposeful, old school steel wheel that you'd find on the Kalahari, except it's actually an alloy wheel, so it's a little bit of a poser, and it's also 20 inches, which is enormous for off-roading, and we know what happens when I've tried to off-road Defenders on 20-inch wheels. Yeah, we'll include the meme, because I can never ever live it down. G'day! And then we come to a rather important piece of off-road gear that this Land Rover doesn't have. Now it does have, I've got the sticker here, the off-road pack and the advanced off-road capability package, which gives you stuff like the active differential, terrain response 2, all really good stuff, but it doesn't have proper recovery points in the rear. You can see where they would go, but even at $82,000, it doesn't have them. Look, I think that Land Rover with the Defender should make stuff like recovery points standard. There are a couple of fantastic options on this Defender. If you've got a furry friend like I do here, or if you love getting your boots a little dirty, you can still get the Defender with plastic/vinyl floors. This makes cleanup a breeze, and I wish absolutely every car ever made could be had with this option because it is fantastic. You can also spec the Defender with something called the County Exterior Package, which includes these stripes down the side of the vehicle, this white on gray on a different shade of gray, and this is a throwback to like the County Defenders from the 1980s. I freaking love it. It looks so cool, and for $600, I think I might do it. And finally we come to probably what is my favorite feature in this Defender, which is just the interior design is so cool. You've got this upright command driving position where you sit on top of the car, which is not what you want in a 911. It's exactly what you want in a Land Rover. And you've got this really neat pass-through design on the dashboard with Defender written across there. I mean, it's so purposeful and it feels very rugged, but also a little premium. That's really what embodies this vehicle, is this dashboard design. Now we probably have to talk about the elephant in the room, which is, yeah, our Defender ownership was a little rocky, but keep in mind, those were really early first model year vehicles that we were dealing with. And the second one was perfect. Once we got that inline 600 Defender, it was rock solid over our ownership period. And it was a great vehicle to own. And actually, from folks I've talked to on forums and in person, people really haven't had that many issues with Defenders. They've proven to be really solid. Plus, they're super comfy. They're really good on-road. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's actually really good. I just wish it was a little bit more affordable, and I might even consider one of these in the future. Guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below. This has been Tommy, behind the camera Ian, and of course Brendan helping out in the background. We'll see you on a future episode.